As most of you know, you are in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them into the question box. I'll try to keep my eye on the box and answer questions as they come up. I do have one person with their hand raised right now, Amy. If you do have a question, you want to go ahead and type it into the box for me, or I can unmute you if you need me to unmute you. Otherwise, today we're going to talk about a topic, one of which we've discussed before, but it's still a pretty hot topic, and that is ACH payments. And the other topic we're going to discuss is credit cards and how to handle our credit cards in our system, which has always been such a mystery to us over the years. And actually that feature has gotten a lot better, and that's the one I'm pretty excited about to show you today. So let's go start with the electronic payments. And I'm going to briefly mention too, Suzanne is not here today, so if I miss anything or you can't see my screen or whatever, please go ahead and type a question in, because she normally comes running in and helps me out when something's not functioning properly. So anyway, let's go to electronic payments. Now, you know, we are entering the era of the electronic money, where I don't know about you, but I don't carry cash with me anymore. And our vendors are starting to request that too. So we're seeing more and more of our clients going to an ACH payment or a NACHA file, as it's referred to in the banking world. And, we have been able to do that. It's built into the system. It's actually very, very easy to set up. So let's say we decide we want to start paying some of our vendors, not all of them, maybe some of them via ACH. How do we set that up? Well, it's actually very simple. Let's go to the setup options in accounts payable first. And the most basic of all things is we've got to turn it on. So we have this separate ACH tab here. And we, first of all, need to enable the functionality. So we're going to turn that on. And we're also going to tell the system that we want it to post to bank rec in detail. Now, what does that mean, post to bank rec in detail? Well, some of us don't have the bank rec module, and that's fine. But others of us, if we do have the bank rec module, do we want this ACH payment going over to bank rec as one lump sum, which is how it's going to hit the bank, or, is it going to go over, do you want the individual, payments for those vendors? And I think it depends on your bank, too. The bank may also be able to do them as individual, but I'll have to check into that for you. Print vendor remittance advice. Well, we most often want to be able to still give the vendor something, whether or not we still stick that in an envelope and mail it to them, or we use our paperless office feature that's built in the system and email it to that vendor. We can do that also, and that can be part of our check printing process. What's the next remittance number? We can start at 1. That's no big deal. Do we want to allow partial allocation of payments? I usually say no to that, because, if I'm going to give the vendor their payment, I'm not going to let them tell me, oh, okay, I want part of it in this bank account, part of it in this bank account, et cetera, et cetera. This isn't payroll. This is vendor payment, so I don't do an allocation. Do we want to reset the pre-note number when we change the vendor number? Normally leave that off. And then it's up to you how long you want to keep your payment history. But here it's important where we determine where are we going to store our ACH payments. Now, all of my stuff is on my C drive. Your guys is on a network drive. So I suggest that you set up a folder here with the ACH, where your ACH files are going to reside once you create them. Keep in mind, if you set this folder up, I usually secure the folder and not let anybody in there, because you do have people's routing numbers and their bank account number in there. So you want to make that a little bit more of a secure location than just sitting out on someone's desktop or a C drive like I have on mine. So we're going to go ahead and accept that. Your next step in the process is to go into the ACH interface maintenance. Now, this is where you're going to choose the bank code that you're going to use when you're paying your checks. Now, the big question is, do I have to set up 2 separate bank codes, one for ACH and one for checks? No. Do I have to set up 2 separate check runs, one where I'm printing checks and the others where I'm doing my ACH? No. That's the beauty of this. You can do it all in the same run. Nothing really changes other than a little bit of the functionality, and it becomes fairly seamless to the person who's processing the AP, and it's pretty easy to do. But when we get into this bank information, I actually have a Word document that I send to our bankers and say, hey, look, guys, you're going to have to help us with this information because, we have to set up the file the way the bank wants that file. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say pre-note approved, which makes this bank code a viable bank code to be using to create an ACH. If I don't have that turned on, it's going to give me feedback and say, hey, no, you can't use this bank account. So I'm going to put in a routing number here of my bank, and we're going to call this Wells Fargo. But the really important things that we need the banker to help us with are these questions in here. Quite often, if you have more than one account with this bank, it's going to ask you for a character to precede the company ID in this file that we're going to provide the bank. So the banker has to tell us, is this a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4? If we have a lot of bank accounts with that banker, that may change. The other thing is on this tab here, do we need to include a debit record? A lot of banks do require that. But most often the one that I see the banks changing is to add a carriage return after each record. Yes, no, carriage return only, line feed, et cetera, et cetera. They have to answer that for us in order to create this file the way that they want it. So, usually what happens is we send that to the bank. They scratch their heads and go, gee, I'm not really sure what to do with this. And then we say, hey, you need to talk to the people that are in your ACH department. They send it to them. They give it back to us. We make changes. We send a pre-note. What is a pre-note? A pre-note is basically a 0 file that they are going to use to test to make sure that they can read our file. We may get it right the first time, or we may have to make some changes. So the pre-note is actually a very important file to send to the bank because we don't want to do that in the 11th hour when we're trying to produce these payments for these vendors. So once we have our setup options done, we're going to go over to vendor maintenance. Now, because of the fact that we turned that ACH on, we are now going to have a new feature that we didn't see before, and this is this electronic payment. So we're going to go ahead and check mark the electronic payment, which now also allows us to go to the More button and choose electronic payment. Now, this is where, I'm going to save this, this is where we're going to put in the vendor's banking information. So you enter their bank account number. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, I can't just put in any old routing number here. Notice that the system knows immediately this is an invalid routing number, just like a credit card number. There's a little mathematical thing that goes on behind the scenes. The system knows whether or not that is a valid routing number or not. So we're going to go ahead and put in a routing number here and tell the bank, or tell our system, is this checking or savings? And then, we put in their bank name. And then you have percent of net amount. Now, this is percent of gross, fixed amount, et cetera. I always do percent of net amount and put in 100%. Because once again, I am not, kind enough where I let them split theirs. I think that's a little crazy anyway. But there may be a specific reason you want to do that. But most vendors, it's always going to be 100%. Now, next field is a very important field, the pre-note field. When you set up your vendors for the first time, we are going to let that set to no. It is not, the pre-note has not yet been sent, because I have a utility to run that when we create that pre-note file, it's going to go through and mark all of your vendors that the pre-note was sent. So it'll mark these as yes. Once we get back from the bank and OK on our pre-note file, we have another little utility that we can run and say, yes, the pre-note has been approved. Once the pre-note is approved, that is when it will be a good vendor for our ACH. Up until that point, if it says no or yes, that vendor's still going to get a check when we print checks. If it says approved, then it's going to try to do the ACH for that vendor, okay? So that's always a big question. It's like, when does that actually happen, okay? So we're going to go ahead and accept that. I'm going to leave mine approved. today and pretend that that kind of has already happened for us. Now, one of the other things that I failed to point out here, in paperless, if you have paperless turned on, you can actually set up the remittance advice to email to that vendor. I'm not going to go into that today because I actually purposely did not set that up today. It's another level of complexity, but it's actually pretty easy. Okay, so you put your invoices in just like you normally would. Nothing there changes. So what happens? Well, once we have that approved, we can go into invoice payment selection just like we always do. Nothing here changes. Now, for today's purposes, I'm going to go ahead and click my Select button, and I'm going to choose the vendors that I want to pay today. And I'm going to pay a couple of airways. I'm going to do this vendor and maybe this invoice here. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. So now it has selected some invoices for me to pay. I know it selected them because my clear button is no longer clear. If I click my little printer icon down here and preview this, what you're going to see is our invoice payment selection listing. Now, right off the bat, what do we have right here? Electronic payment. So we know of this check run, these 3 vendors, this one is set up for the ACH. All right, so do I want to print my checks and remittance advices at this point? Yes, I do. So on this screen here, I can tell the system, do I just want to print checks? Do I just want to print electronic payments? Or do I want to do both? Normally, I want to do both because I don't want to do them as 2 separate functions. So this is the same check printing screen that you've always been in. Nothing here changes. So if I go ahead and hit print, I'm going to get my checks. I'm going to try to throw this to Adobe to see if I can get it to come up to the screen. So you can see the check is just like it was before. Let's see if it likes this or not. I probably shouldn't have changed that at this point, but let's see what it's going to do for us. It's trying to create an Adobe print file. And it may not like that since it's printing checks, but we'll take a quick look here. Or maybe not such a quick look. Yeah, I think I'm going to kill that. Sorry about that, guys. I probably shouldn't have tried to experiment there. All right, so now it thinks it printed a check. Now the next thing it's trying to do is print our remittance advice. Okay, notice that we're in the electronic payment remittance advice here. So once again, I'm not going to shoot it to Adobe. I'm going to go ahead and hit print, and you should be able to hear it print through my printer over here to my left, but it actually printed a remittance form. I am going to kind of cheat a little bit, and I'm going to go back in here so I can show you what that remittance advice looks like. It gave me a warning that it had already printed. And I'm going to go ahead and say print stubs already printed so you can see it. Now this is just like a regular form that you can customize. So it doesn't have to look like this, but this is what it would look like by default. Okay, so now let's go ahead and print our check register. And I'm going to go ahead and print that out also. Now this I do have paperless turned on, so hopefully it will show it to me. All right, good. So here are our check numbers, 4 and 5. These were our regular checks that I tried to get to come to the screen, but wouldn't come to the screen for me. And notice that this check number here has an E. That means it was an electronic check. Okay, so that's the difference. They both appear on your check register, but one will appear with the E. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes to update my register, and I'm going to do my daily transaction register. This is just like normal. So nothing really changed other than, you print your checks, and then you go back and, the system will automatically prompt you to print the remittance advice for the electronic checks. So everything is the same as it normally was. So none of that changed. Easy, So what do we do next? Now, all we've done is actually print checks and printed remittance advices, but I have not yet created that file. So how do I create the file? Well, what you do is you go into Generate ACH File. So in here, what you do is, it'll default to today. Here's today's date, the 10/7. I'm choosing only batches never transmitted. Now I'm going to try this again. Let's see if it gets mad at me. But I'm going to go ahead and hit Proceed. And this time, I'm going to go ahead and throw that on my desktop and save it. And this is what the ACH file listing will print out and look like. It will tell you how many batches were processed, how many records were in the batch, and then here you've got your total amount. So that should match your check register. So what has happened is in the background, it has created a file that we have in my case, on my C drive. Let me go down here in my ACH. And here is today's date. And actually was playing earlier. That's why I've got a couple more. So this is my last one. It was done at 10/16. I know that's my last one. So this is the file that I'm going to go out to my banking software, and I'm going to upload this file to the bank. And that's what they're going to use to process your checks. Easy, real easy, and, fairly painless. The biggest part is getting that initial pre-note file to work, and then after that, easy peasy. So that's how we do ACHs. You're going to see a lot more of these. You're going to see a lot more vendors, requesting these. I have had clients ask me, if I want to do this, how do I go about starting? Obviously you want to call your bank first. You do want to send out a notification to your vendors saying that you would like to start doing ACH, and you need to get a, their routing number and their bank account number. A lot of people, there's this fear about, oh my gosh, are my vendors going to trust me, et cetera. Keep in mind, you're putting money into their account. You're not taking money out. So it's not, something that they have to worry about, that you're going to pull money out of their account. Okay. So that's the ACH. Now, let's talk about credit cards. Now, keep in mind, the system does not, quote, pay your credit card for you. You still have to write that credit card vendor a check or pay them ACH. But, we've got all these other things that are happening during the month that, we're more and more paying by credit cards. A lot of us want the points or, or whatever benefit that we're getting from the credit cards. But how do we handle it in the system? Now, I want you to keep in mind, these two subjects that we're talking about today came directly from clients in this last week contacting me via email or phone or whatever and saying, hey, how do I would love you to do a Tech Tuesday on. So this is kind of interesting that this came up, and I actually, this one I'm really excited about. So let's go into, what do you have to do first to handle your credit card bill payment, okay? Well, the very first thing is you need to look at your credit card vendor. So I have American Express set up in here as my credit card vendor, and the very, very first thing that you have to do is make sure that you have a check mark on this vendor that shows that this is your credit card vendor. Now the check mark, gives this vendor certain privileges, which I'm going to show you here in a second. So let's look at our first scenario. There are two different types of credit card transfers built in the system. There's what we call a purchase transfer, and there's an invoice transfer. And you're saying, well, what do you mean by transfer? Well, we want to transfer the amount to the credit card vendor that we need to pay. But the biggest problem that we all have when we're dealing with credit card vendors is that we want the initial expense on the originating vendor. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, if I am buying from, Container Corporation, but I'm paying via a credit card, I need to know my year-to-date purchases for Container Corporation. I need to know how much business I'm doing with that vendor, because in some cases, it helps me negotiating prices and so forth. So I need those expenses on the originating vendor, not necessarily credit card vendor, but I have to get them to the credit card vendor to pay it. So how do I do that? Well, there's actually two different things that you can do, two different ways we can handle this. So let's talk about a purchase transfer. Now, get in your mind right now. Purchase transfer means the invoices are not yet in the system for the originating vendor. So I have a statement. My statement has come in the mail from my credit card vendor, and I need to put the information in for that statement. Okay, so this is my October 2014 statement. Now, one thing, red flag that I'm going to mention right now. You notice that I put in October 2014. Do not just put OCT. Do not just put SEPT. And you say, why? Because next year, you're going to put OCT. And what is that? That is an existing invoice. So instead of putting a new invoice number in, you are actually adjusting an old invoice. So keep in mind, whenever you have credit card vendors, utilities, whatever, this invoice number still needs to be unique. So I always like to add the date to it or the year, so I know that it's always going to be a unique invoice. So my credit card statement came in, and I have $1,500 on that statement. Now, when I go to my Lines tab, I have a new button that I don't see on any of my other vendors. It's called the Transfer Information button. So if you click on that button, it's going to say, okay, well, who do you want to transfer, who do I want to transfer from? Now, I'm not transferring from anybody. I'm looking at the statement and going, oh, here's a credit card transaction to Stevens Supply. So I'm going to come here, and I'm going to go down to my Stevens Supply. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to put in the GL account number. Remember, the invoice is not in the system. I'm working off the credit card statement. So I'm going to put in the GL account number that this expense that's on my statement belongs to, and it's $500. Okay? And I'm going to click OK. Now, I still have more money to distribute. So, as we all know, I went to the SAGE conference earlier this year. So I got some travel and entertainment. And, oops, I spent a little bit more money than that. And there's the rest of my distribution, normal distribution from my statement, because some of them are going to be the vendors, some of them are going to be like this, travel and entertainment, restaurants, whatever. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on Accept. I'm going to print my register, and I'll let you, it should be paperless, so it should come out here to the screen. We have one more register. There we go. So here, this is our credit card vendor. This is the invoice number we created, and this is saying that it's going to Warehouse Supplies, and it's a transfer for Stevens Supplies. So if you had more vendors that you wanted to make sure that it gets on their history record, you would see those, and then the rest are just travel and entertainment, office supplies, et cetera, right? So we're going to update that register, and I'm going to print my daily transaction register. Now this looks just like normal. It's going to be a credit to your payables, and it's going to be a debit to the expenses that you noted when you put that new invoice in. So let's go back now, and let's look at those vendors. Okay? So I'm going to pull up Stevens Supply. Now keep in mind, I did not put an invoice in for Stevens Supply. I was in my credit card vendor, right? So I'm going to come here, I'm going to go to my Invoices tab, and lo and behold, look what I have. I have an invoice showing that it was paid by Amex, my Amex vendor, $500, and my balance is 0. My check number starts with a C. Now, isn't this awesome, guys? Double-click on it, and it shows a 0 balance, that it's paid. I can go to my lines, and it shows me that it was a transfer. If I drill down into my transfer information, it was transferred from American Express, and it was transferred using the OCT 2014 invoice. How cool is that? So now the expense goes to the GL account number we want it to go to, but the history still goes to the vendor that we need to record it on. I mean, awesome? Awesome. This is great. So now let's go back and look at American Express. So let's come down here to my Amex, and there's my October invoice. I can double click on that. It's got an open balance, as it should. I can go to my lines. I can see that I had, 2 lines on here. I can see the GL accounts. And once again, I can drill and know that that $500 belonged to Stevens Supply. So from the opposite, from the other end, I can drill and see, where did this expense come from? Too cool, right? Too cool. So let's go back now. That's how we do a purchase transfer. So these are invoices that are not in the system yet, or expenses, that we're reading directly off of that statement. Okay, I want you to put a different hat on now. Let's talk about purchases and invoices that we already have in the system, because we can actually do an invoice transfer. Maybe we put an invoice into the system and we know that we're going to pay that via a credit card. A great example of that is some of our purchases. So let's real quick, we're going to enter a purchase order, and we're going to kind of follow the process, so to speak. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to enter a new purchase order. I'm buying from Container Corporation. I'm going to go here to my lines. I'm going to pick this guy here. I'm ordering 10 of these. Normal PO, no big deal. Everything's fine and dandy, okay? A couple days later, we go in and we do receipt of goods. We choose that purchase order. I don't have an invoice number yet. This is our normal real life. We don't have the invoice. We just have the packing slip. Going to receive that in. I'm going to print my receipt of goods register. So what does this do? This gets my inventory into my stock, and it shows that I've received on this purchase order. So here's my receipt of goods register showing that I've ordered 10, I've received 10. Okay? Now, I'm not going to worry about the daily transaction register right now. 2 days later, I get the invoice in the mail. So it goes to my accounting department. They come in here, and they are receiving in this invoice number. Okay, so now we finally have this invoice. I'm going to go here to my lines, and I'm, going to receipt it in on this vendor. Because if I don't do this, I know I'm paying it via credit card, but if I don't do this, my PO will never close. Because remember, in some of the other Tech Tuesdays we've had, quantity ordered, quantity received, quantity invoiced, all have to be the same, 10, 10, and 10. Otherwise, my PO will never close. And if I come in here and I put an invoice in with 0 cost, I'm going to get a register that tells me that, I've posted it into inventory for one cost and posted it into invoicing for another cost. And I don't want that. I want everything to flow properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to receive this invoice onto the vendor, even though I know that I'm paying it via credit card. So I'm going to do my normal process here. So just like before, processing our receipt of goods. And here's our purchases journal, and there may be a bill tax journal. So here it is. Here's our receipt of invoice register, and it shows that we ordered 10, received 10, invoiced 10. So now this PO is going to complete, which is what I want. Now, however, I'm going to worry about that right now. However, if I go back and I look at that vendor, now I have an invoice on that vendor that I know I've paid via credit card. So there's that invoice. I know I've paid that via credit card. I don't want it on the vendor, but I needed to get the expense there, and I needed to put the invoice in order to properly close my purchase order. So what do? Well, we come in here to invoice data entry. and we pull up our credit card vendor, and we put in that invoice number that we want to transfer to the credit card vendor. Get it? So now we're going to go to lines. I'm going to hit my transfer information button, and I'm going to choose my container corporation. And this time, I'm going to choose that invoice that I just put into the system, because this is the one I know I've paid via the credit card, and I want it over onto American Express. So I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to print my register. All right, so here we go, and just like before, got another little recap here. So it shows, here's my American Express, here's the invoice number, transfer from Container Corporation using invoice number, blah, blah, blah. So now I'm going to update that, and I'm going to print my daily transaction register. Now I'm going to show you, most often your daily transaction register may be blank. Mine's not, because I have vendors from 2 different divisions, so I have 2 different payables is the way my system is set up. So otherwise, it's just a plain old debit and credit, and it may not even create a daily transaction register. So now, if I go back and I look at Container Corporation, let's go here. We look at Container Corporation, and looky-see, it is paid. It is paid with a credit card. I can see that down here. If I double-click, my lines are my normal lines because, it did come from my purchase order. If I go to my Payments tab, I see that it was paid via credit card. Shows it right there. I can drill down, and it went to American Express. Cool, right? And let's go ahead and choose American Express. And boom. There's my payment, or excuse me, my invoice. I double-click. I go to my lines. I can see it was a transfer. I drill down, and it came from Container. So once again, both directions I can see. Okay, 2 questions here. How would you control this? Are we talking, George, about the credit cards, or are we back on the ACH? Credit card, okay. You would, that kind of depends on how you manage it currently. Whoever is paying these via credit card now would probably do the same process that they do. Now, I'll just kind of go through the process that I go through. When I get an invoice, because every one of us, well, not every one of us, but managers and partners here are issued a credit card. When I have an invoice, I actually write on there paid by credit card. And then when it goes to our bookkeeper, then she knows that she puts the invoice in, but then she knows she has to transfer it to the credit card, to the credit card vendor. So pretty much it could probably stay the same way that it is, except for the fact that the person who is receiving the invoice needs to know that it was paid via credit card. I just write it on my invoice so that they know. You do have to be careful because you do not want to double pay that vendor. Okay, can we apply a credit card payment to a paid in full invoice to reflect credit card status on the invoice? If you do that, I'm going to say it's probably going to go negative. But we can test that, Jenny, just to be sure. And maybe when we go offline, we can talk a little bit further about that. Okay. Now, as you can tell, I'm really excited over this credit card stuff. But for the first time in a while, we are going to have a bonus round. Okay. So look at our credit card vendor here. Look at American Express. So throughout the month, I can do this throughout the month. I can do it at the end of the month. I can do it when I get the statement. I would probably suggest if we're doing the purchases, we're going to be doing it throughout the month. So my credit card vendor has all of these invoices on it, and most often I think most of your companies are like ours. Anything that comes in on the credit card 1 month is paid in full at the end of each month. So I know by the end of the month, I have $5,400 on my credit card. But I want to send them a check with just one invoice on it. I don't want all these individual invoices on it because, I like it neat and tidy, and I don't want them, I don't want the credit card vendor to try to look at it and go, what on earth are they doing? So I want to combine all of these individual invoices that I put on here into one. So how can I do that? Well, how, you ask? We can do it via a transfer. So let's go here, and let's go to Invoice Data Entry. And once again, I'm going to choose our credit card vendor. And what I'm going to say, I'm going to call this October 2014 Combine. Now, this is probably more for me than it is a credit card vendor. Oh, and yeah, and by the way, if I looked away, I forgot what the balance is, I can always click on my hyperlink to the vendor number and go over here to my invoices and know, oh yeah, it's 5,413 cents. So then I can close that back down. Watch your hyperlinks. They are very helpful to you. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my Lines tab. I'm going to click on my Transfer button. And now I'm going to choose my credit card vendor. So I'm choosing the credit card vendor within itself. So here I have this Select button. I can click on Select, and it shows me all of my credit card vendors' invoices. So I can select them all by clicking the little green check mark and click OK, and then OK again, and Accept, and let's go ahead and print this register out. And we should have one more register after this. There we go. So this is basically saying, okay, I'm the Amex, and I'm transferring from Amex. So what does that do for me? I'm going to do our daily transaction register. And then, voila. It's basically an in and out. So let's go back to the credit card vendor. And then it's going to show, oops, it went too far. There it is. Go to Invoices. And it's all combined now into one invoice. And that's the invoice that I'm going to pay via a check. Now, Barb has actually asked a kind of pretty interesting question here. How does this impact 1099 miscellaneous reporting? Doesn't the credit card vendor have to report on the purchases made through them, and my company have to report made directly to the vendor? That is correct. That is absolutely correct. That the credit card vendor does have to report the 1099 information. Now, if you know you're going to pay it via, and this is, I'm kind of doing this, as right off the top of my head here, but I'm thinking if you know you're going to pay this one via a credit card, when you enter the invoice, there is the field on the invoice, and hopefully I'll be able to choose, I don't know if Container Corporation is a 1099 vendor or not. They're not. But I believe what you could do here is just set this to none when you put this particular invoice in. So, and as we all know, we can always edit our 1099 information at any time during the year and base it off of just our payments. So, we would have to kind of take a deeper dive into that one. But I'm thinking probably what you would end up doing when you put the invoice in that you paid via credit card, whether it's in through purchases or through AP invoice data entry, you can set this to none. So it will not be included in your year-to-date 1099 information. So anyway, anybody have any more questions on that? I just thought that was a really neat topic, and learned a few things on my own. This process has actually changed over the years, and I think gotten a little bit better. And it is one of those hard things. It's how do we handle, I got all this credit card stuff between the ACHs and the credit cards, times they are changing. But yes, you are correct. And, it does have to be monitored, whether it is a credit card or it is an ACH. There are security options that are set up under roll maintenance for the ACHs. You want to be extremely cautious with that. You want to put checks and balances in there because you are wiring money. And, you know, we all trust our employees. We all, you know we have good hearts, you know, deep down. But sometimes, you know, you have to be careful, and you have to make sure that you put checks and balances in there so that, you know, crazy things don't happen. And, you know, with the credit card, you know, that's, once again, you know, if things are being paid via credit card, everything still needs to be approved. Whether it is, you know, paid by a credit card or a check, everything still needs to be approved by the management. Once again, you know, we certainly don't want to pay for a luxury boat down in the Bahamas or something. I would love it myself, but, you know, I don't think management would like it if I did that. But anyway, so that's all I have for today. Please email me with topics. I thought this was a great one. It was a fun one to explore. I'll be sending you out the information later today. Play with it in a test company, see how it works for you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to give me a call. Otherwise, y'all have a great day, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.